Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. For some reason, 8:30 seems early, even though I know in the time before 8:30 would be a normal time. We'd all be in the cafeteria at Berkeley Carroll gathering together in person. But we're glad you could join us on Zoom today. For our panel of experts, just want to quickly introduce myself. I'm Kalia Williams. I'm one of the college counselors here at Berkeley Carroll. And you can't see her because she's not spotlighted, even though she should be, is Mary Dunn, who's the Director of Operations for the college office. And I will let the rest of the college office introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn Middleton. I'm the Director of College Counseling. You get lots and lots of emails from me, and you will until your child graduates.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Luis Almonte, and I'm one of the college counselors in the college office at Berkeley Carroll. And in the near future, I might be working with your child, and I'm very excited to be here with all of you today.
And I should just say, this is Lewis's second year with Berkeley Carroll, and Carolyn and I have been here 5 and 6 years respectively, I think, although it feels like much longer sometimes. And Ms. Dunn, I think Ms. Dunn has been here longer than anybody because she knows everything about Berkeley Carroll. So she is sort of our source of infinite information. If we could have our panelists introduce themselves and maybe give us a little bit about what their role has been in the process, college application process at BC, and we'll start from there.
Good morning. My name is Felicia Stenhouse-Eve, and I am a parent at Berkeley Carroll. I have 2 graduates and a current junior. My son Michael graduated in 2017 and is a senior at Tufts University this year. He'll be graduating this month, exactly, Carolyn, from the School of Engineering. And my daughter Madison is a sophomore at Pomona. She's been remote for the last year and a half, but she will be a junior at Pomona College in California. And my youngest Maxwell will be returning from a semester away program from the Island School in the Bahamas this afternoon, and he's a junior. And my part in the college application process, to be honest, the 2 times I've done it, I keep my introduction to a minimum. Like, they really kind of take it on themselves. We kind of insisted that they do that so that it's their stuff and not our stuff. But yeah, I was a proofreader, and more often than not in that part.
Hello, my name is Disney Spring. I graduated from Berkeley Carroll in 2019 and currently go to Colorado College. So I've only ever done this from the student side of things, but my brother is actually not at Berkeley Carroll, but currently a junior, and so starting that college process. And it's nice to not be the one who's applying to everything. But yeah, I guess kind of along the lines of what
Adam.
Yeah, parent interference in the college process is honestly best kept to a minimum. I think that would be my word of advice, and I can talk about that more later. But yeah.
Okay, sorry if you hear somebody else in the background. I live in an apartment. But hi, I'm Sarah. I am also a former Berkeley Carroll student like Eugenie, but my role today is more to speak to the gap year experience because I just take a gap year, which I'm currently on, and I love it. I'll be going to Colgate University in upstate New York in August, but I love my gap year and I'm excited to talk about it. And I guess my word of advice is definitely do not get hung up on one school or thinking that a certain place is meant for you, because there are a lot of different schools that don't always look exactly the same that can be the right fit.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Liam Dean Johnson. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a Senior Assistant Director of Admissions at NYU, New York University. I work most closely with our arts programs there, so I can say a lot about auditions and portfolios and all of that good stuff. But I think a word of advice for parents of 9th and 10th graders is I started really late in the process. I was an international student, didn't realize I wanted to come to the US or even think about it until about the beginning of my 12th grade year. And I think I lost a lot of time thinking about fit. And that's something that comes up so much today in what I do. And I think you're doing doing the exact right thing now by being here and really taking that extra time, starting early to work with your students and really think about where's actually going to feel like home for them.
Hi, I'm Eve Hall, and I'm a parent of two Berkeley Carroll students. I have a son, Noah, who's graduating next week, Noah Shacknai, which I can't believe. And my son, Aaron, is in 7th grade. And advice, I think I would say that probably the most important thing you can do as a parent during the high school years is just to nurture your kids' passions and interests, and to sort of focus on how to help them thrive in this moment of their development. And college obviously is a very important piece of that puzzle, but I would say, focus on helping them sort of develop their interests and their passions for their own enjoyment and pleasure.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Usino. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions at Lafayette College. I'm also the Director of Student Access and Success at Lafayette, which means I run sort of mentoring and cohort retention programs. I also lead our merit scholarship on a great team and a dynamic team. So happy to be here and give that perspective. One thing I can say, and I feel like everyone's going to think Berkeley Carroll's paying me under the table after I say it, but I promise you they are not. Working for a highly selective liberal arts college, I'm in my 5th year, have read thousands and thousands of applications. I'm actually the reader and the manager for Berkeley Carroll students. What I can tell you as a parent right now, rest easy, take a deep breath. The fact that you chose Berkeley Carroll, there's a return of that investment, especially in highly selective institutions. We know the caliber of the curriculum of Berkeley Carroll. We know the tenacity and the multiplicitous identities that your scholars bring. And the excellence and the expertise of this college office is near, far, and wide. They are known within our admissions fields as being some of the best. They provide some of the best recommendations where we really get to know your students. So just know that when your students are out there and it's all out of your control, the fact that Berkeley Carroll is on the transcript and the fact that this college team is behind them, they bode incredibly well. And I am speaking from someone who's been doing this for years. And I travel, sort of nationally, and I work with other directors of admissions. Your Berkeley Carroll scholars are in excellent hands, and the college office treats this for your scholars as a discernment process, as a journey. And it's not only good for them emotionally and mentally, but you have brand name recognition out here in the admission streets. So I just wanted to kind of calm you and have you know that from our end. So thanks for listening to that.
As a parent who's gone through this process twice, she's absolutely right. I've spoken to other parents at other schools about their college processes, and it is sorted. Let's put it that way. There's definitely different approaches to it. But Berkeley Carroll, the first kid, for those of you who have multiple kids, the first kid is the test bunny anyway, right? So you're trying to figure it all out. And our Michael was like that kid that's just even sure, he was willing to try and do anything and everything. Whereas Madison was very much like, leave me alone. I'm not interested in you proofreading anything. And we respected that, But Berkeley Carroll definitely has a reputation in these college streets, for real. They really do. They have a great reputation. The schools where our kids go to, Tufts, Pomona College, are very highly selective, and they felt lucky to have our kids there.
So I think we should just end the record button now and send everybody on their way. I thank you for that high praise. But I do have some questions that I would like to ask of our panel, and then I think we'll leave plenty of time for the parents to ask questions themselves if there's something that you feel like we haven't covered or something else that you're interested in. We want to make sure there's plenty of time for that. But I'm going to switch gears a little bit. You can continue to praise the college office as much as you'd like, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the different aspects of the application itself. And the first thing I thought we could talk about is the essay. We as an office talk a lot about the value of the essay in the process. And so would love it if the alumni could talk a little bit about what their writing process was like. And then if the admissions officers could share a little bit about how you use the essay in your evaluation process. And parents, if you want to, Felicia and Eve, if you want, which is funny to say your names together. Not intentional. But if you want to talk a little bit about maybe your involvement in your students' essay writing process, please feel free to jump in. But maybe Eugenie, if you could start us off.
Yes, I think went into the process with several ideas for an essay, and some of them were completely unviable. And Ms. Williams was my college counselor, and so we talked through a lot of them. And I think that was one of the most important parts of the process for me, is being able to like have someone who like was intimately aware of like all of the phases of the process and like how I had been approaching them and my personal ideas. And I mean, Berkeley Carroll is a small school, but like she always remembered exactly like where we had left off and like what my thought process had been. And I think that like that is extremely important. I ended up being quite happy with my college essay. It like part of it was my senior speech, I think too. I don't know if everyone's aware of that yet, but that's a thing that happened at Berkeley Carroll. But I felt like it was a good representation of like what I wanted to send off, like a personal statement, what I wanted to send off to a college. And I certainly would not have gotten there without like several hours in Ms. Williams' office talking through everything with her. And in terms of like my parents' involvement in it, they did not look at it once. And that is how I preferred it. I think there's no way your kid is going to apply to college without anyone seeing what they're sending off. There are so many people involved in this process, not only just the people in the college office, but I feel like some other teachers maybe read my essay, or just like there are people to proofread stuff without them being your parent, who you are also probably maybe butting heads with at home, or you know what all your relationships with your students are like. But I think for me, keeping things separate, especially in that writing process and revision process, was important, because I like really wanted to make sure what I was sending off was authentic to me and not like what I thought others thought would be best for me. And so I thought I got that from the college office. Yeah.
So I definitely think I started a little bit later than I would have liked to. I think just drafting in the summer can be really helpful. I didn't start writing my essay until September of my senior year. Luckily, the college office and my parents and everybody who I had proofreading my work were really supportive of getting me to a spot where I had some writing I was proud of. And I did really like my essay when I had to send it in. I think kind of like the advice I said before, like you have so many drafts you can write, so many different directions you can go in. There are so many prompts. Don't get stuck on this, like, this is what I think my college essay should be, because like Eugenie said, like the college office is there and they know what is part of this process. So really listen and be open to like feedback or maybe taking it in a new direction. And definitely it never hurts to have an early start.
Liam and Christina, would you like to speak to the value of the essay on your side of the desk?
Sure, yeah. I think, so in terms of the personal statement itself, I think that the best way of thinking about it truly is, what can this add to my application that we don't hear about elsewhere? I will say in the process, as we're reading it in an admissions office, it's really where the applications come alive. And you all, like everyone has mentioned, have such great resources here to help your student really bring their experience and their story to life, without it being cliche, without it being just, you know, a year by year, play by play or narrative, which we have received in our office. I think before the word limit was introduced, apparently we had like an 18-page paper with a page for every year of their life. But I like to think of it as somewhere between, you know, creative writing and an essay. It should ultimately make a point, but it should also tell us a bit about how your students write. And that's kind of what we're looking for, right? We're looking for how they advocate for themselves, how they really put their experience into words to see what we're going to be able to provide for them on our college campuses, as well as what they'll bring to us. So you're in good hands. I have no concerns and have never read an essay from Berkeley Carroll that I have been concerned about. But I truly think that to the students' points as well, letting them direct that journey is so critical. I had never shown any of my essays to my parents. I liked it better that way. But I think knowing that you have experts in this space as well to be able to guide them through that process is going to be really critical.
Yes, that's great advice, Liam. Love when I'm in company with great advice givers. So I just also too want to stress sort of the moment in time that we're in. And so with so many colleges and universities going test optional, and a lot of the transcripts being impacted, you know, in terms of rigor perhaps, or pass fail, or right, sort of things shifting because of the times that we're in with this global pandemic. The personal statement now, I think, weighs much more heavily than previous years. And I don't say that to alarm anyone. I say that as an invitation for students to spend probably the most quality time with that piece of their application. And so as a parent, what I can offer you is to sort of have that unconditional positive regard, right? If you're anxious because you know how important this is, kind of spend time with yourself, whether that be with your partner or, hey, even your therapist, right? Like if you are anxious for your child about the essay, those are energies that you don't want to bring to them, right? So maybe over, you know, the dinner table, it's more about how, you know, how excited are you to have your voice in this process? Are you feeling proud of your writing? You really want to provide sort of that positive regard and treat this process as a self-exploration process, because the best essays that I have read are when I can tell that a student is exercising self-awareness. The essays come in all different types, all different topics, but the universality of the success of any essay is when a student can express self-awareness and connect that to a piece of our institution or their overall goal, or just give us a sense of who they are. So your role, I think, as a parent is to really provide them a space of unconditional positive regard, lean into curiosity about their essay, but trust that they'll do that process. And just, I think, kind of mirroring to them that it should be an authentic piece of their application.
My experience, well, but we won't talk about my experience because everybody on here knows my kids and I'm not going to get into specifics. So what I will say to parents directly is fix yourself, right? So like, don't bring your anxiety and my kid needs to get into this school or this type of school to your kid's process, right? At the point when they get to the point, in my opinion, in my experience, by the time they're getting ready to write a college essay, they have written any number of essays at Berkeley Carroll. If they have never asked you to read it, don't start with the college application essay. Like, that's just not the place to do it. And really know your kid. Like, provide your child with different experiences so that they have things to pull from to write these very colorful essays and things that really speak to what they're interested in and their experiences and how they personally see that they have grown. Because you are an English major, or your parent was an English major, no, don't do it. That's what Kalia and Miss Middleton and those are for. Because you will argue with your children about any number of different things. Pick up your clothes. Did you pick this up? Where were you? All these different things. It should not be an argument about your college essay. The process is stressful enough as it is, particularly now in these last few years, the world that we've been in. And it's intimidating for them, you know, like no matter how good of a student they have been and how confident they come across and how they have conquered everything at Berkeley Carroll, it is a daunting process. And I just found like if we managed our stress about that process, it was most helpful to our kids. It definitely posed that way for our son, which his college process was very different from our daughters. 2 years later, he was an athlete, he was a musician, and he was being recruited by some schools to play soccer. In addition to, you know, he was a well-rounded student and did well in school. So it was a different type of process. I'll never forget walking in Kalia's office the very first time, saying to her, and we had never really met before that, and was just like, I think we need to look at Michael as a package. Like I was very intentional, like we shouldn't just look at him as a smart Black boy. Like he's a smart Black boy who plays 2 instruments in this, you know, competitive jazz band, and he plays, you know, soccer outside of school and all those things. And Michael's essay for college really incorporated all of those things in a way that anybody that read it would have been like, this is a very well-rounded kid. And I had no parts of that. Like he, you know, the nuances of it came from him and Kalia, and you know, my husband helped some with him with that. And Madison's essay, I never read it until after she had hit send on the button to send it. So did that cause me angst? For sure, but it's hers. She owned it, you know. So I think that's the best advice I can give you, is just like recognize early on what's your stuff and what's their stuff, and don't give them your stuff.
I think one of the things that was really, really super important in this process, to what somebody else was saying earlier, is that Berkeley Carroll gives you incredible guidance along this process and paces you, helps you along, doesn't overload you with information, doesn't give you too much to worry about too soon. They help you along this process in a very thoughtful and well-paced way. And one of the things that they said, and they were so right, was that the kids should start working on their essay over the summer and have a draft by the time school starts. And that is a hugely important, for us, or for my son, was a hugely important piece of guidance. Because what that did was it enabled him to think about what he wanted to write about, and sort of really sort of simmer on it and think about the different aspects of it, so that when he got into the fall of senior year, when there's a lot of other stuff to do, not just to apply to college, but you know, school remains important in the fall of senior year, you know, he could not be worried about that. He still had work to do on the essay, of course, but the heavy lifting, if you will, was already done. And the work that he did with Kalia on it, I think, was, you know, hugely helpful to him. It was a sort of a very nurturing process that made him feel really good, and, you know, gave him a lot of confidence in what he was doing. I know a lot of people have said, you know, I didn't see it, my kid hit send, that was not the case in our house. I did read my son's essay, I did talk to him about it, and in fact, it was actually a really meaningful experience to brainstorm with him about this, because we were just sort of, my husband and I were just encouraging him to write about something that really meant something to him, that was really honest and authentic to who he is as a person. And it never, you know, and so that was part of how that unfolded for him. It wasn't like we weren't, you know, reading it for the first time after he'd already applied to college. So it really depends on your, you know, your kid and what they want. They're the one whose lead you should be following. And in our case, he wanted us to read it, so.
Just to give a little bit of a plug for some of the things we do for students. to make sure that they are ready to put together a draft before the start of senior year. We do, and because we've gone virtual, we do an essay writing week with them now, where they get several videos over the course of a week and a Q&A panel with admissions officers from schools across the country. And then we also host essay writing workshops throughout the summer to make sure that they have an opportunity to sit down with a small group of their peers and our office to just get that brainstorming process going. And then we will read any number of essay drafts that a student brings to us. I'm sure some students are like, I wish Miss Williams would stop telling me to do this and to do that, but we're constantly in those documents working with students and making sure that they are representing themselves in the best possible way. I'm going to switch gears a little bit to talk about extracurricular activities, which I think is another question that a lot of 9th and 10th grade parents might have. And so if their students, our alumni, could talk a little bit about some of the things that they did while they were at Berkeley Carroll that sort of helped shape them into who they are now, and maybe a little bit about how those activities might play a part in what they're doing in college or what they've been doing in college. And Sarah, maybe what you hope to do in college next year.
I guess I can start. Gosh, it's been a little while since I've had to like consolidate all of these things into a sentence to kind of describe myself, which I think is something that's kind of a little strange about the college process, where you are kind of selling yourself through all of your extracurriculars and everything. But while I was at Berkeley Carroll, the things I think I enjoyed doing the most and talked about a fair amount and then have like influenced what I plan to do, where I did SRD, the Science Research and Design program at Berkeley Carroll, which starts in 10th grade and then culminates in 12th with a independent science research project in a number of fields. And I did a lot of writing and research for that, and included parts of that in my college applications. I also was on the robotics team, which was started my junior year, which was something that I felt like I wanted to include because I really enjoyed doing it, even though I'd only done it for 2 years. I think like there's kind of a conception that like you want like very rigid like through line, that I have been sticking to this thing for all of high school, which shows my like dedication to extracurricular. And I think while that is like a great thing to display, it also isn't completely necessary in some areas. So that's an example of something I did for only 2 years. I did some things outside of school. I was a part of Brooklyn Youth Chorus, and I talked about that. That wasn't really something with Berkeley Carroll, but definitely an important part of what I did. Gosh, I'm kind of like blanking on other extracurriculars. But those were the kind of 3, or I guess 2 at Berkeley Carroll that I felt really displayed the kind of student that I was at the time, and then also wanted to be going into college. I have not declared yet because I took this spring semester off because I didn't want to do any online learning, but I plan on being a chemistry major, and that's something that I was interested in high school, talked about a little bit in parts of my application, and then I'm planning to do in college. And I know that that is not how it is for a lot of kids. I think certainly many of my friends went into college with absolutely no idea of what they wanted to do, which is totally fine. That's just, I have kind of, I guess, stuck with what I was interested in. And so my extracurriculars demonstrated that in a way. I guess I hope that answers some of the questions, but yeah.
So I did Senior Scholars, which is a program for seniors that is humanities research. And I would say that shaped a lot of how I feel about college now. We had independent projects. I did mine on the relationship between horse racing and forces of oppression. I am an equestrian, so I do like horses. And I feel like it totally changed how I feel about college. It made me really confident because I was terrified about college writing. And now I'm totally a journal article reading freak. I love JSTOR, which I never thought I would say. And then some of the other stuff I did at Berkeley Carroll, I was a peer leader. I was a member of the Key Society. And I think those for me made me realize how much I love representing the school, which I think that it might not be clear what that has to do with college, but I think having school pride, and I don't, you all might not know, but Colgate has a lot of school pride. I learned that that's something I actually do care about. Like, I need to go to a place where people love where they go and they're freaks about it. And then I played on the soccer team and it was a lot of fun. I realized that horses are more my thing than soccer, but you know, I had the time to figure that out. And I think that's an important part of extracurriculars too. Like, your student is still a child and they're still trying to figure out what they like to do. And they're going to take those 4 years. Like, Eugenie found robotics in her junior year. Like, you have this time to still find who you are. And of course you have your whole life to figure it out, but it's a weird time. So giving your student and the student giving themselves space to explore, the school really helps with that.
And then maybe if Liam and Christina can talk a little bit about how you use the students' extracurricular activities to get a sense of who they are in the application.
Sure. I can start off. Yeah, I think so. What we kind of made a transition in the NYU admissions review process a couple of years ago from using terms like extracurriculars and activities to thinking about engagement, right? So we kind of wanted to underscore not just what are you doing in a really formal sense of the word, what are you doing in your school, though of course that is a huge part of it, but also to really think about, you know, the whole scope of a student's life outside of the classroom, which encompasses so much. So it's obviously all of the things that you're doing in school, but also any part-time jobs, family responsibilities, other things that happen outside of the classroom that impact your life. We want that full context. And I see Christina nodding, so I hope I'm speaking for admissions reps in general. But I think to Eugenie's point as well, it's not really about crafting one single image of yourself in the activities section or the engagement section. We're not looking for that. Never have I sat down with an application and said, this student's activities are too focused in one area or too broad. We're going to kind of come in with a charitable assumption and say this student is passionate about a lot of things, or the student is really deeply passionate about a couple of areas, right? So I think giving your students the permission to know that they don't have to tell a single story about themselves throughout the application, I think can also be really critical. We want to see chemists who also play the tuba and want to get involved in social justice initiatives off campus. Like, all of that really adds to the culture. And I think one of the misconceptions that comes up a lot with students is that they think that if they're applying to, say, our business school, everything in the application has to be about business. They have to like go full force on that. But I think and you will all be doing this already, but yeah, just giving them the space and the permission to feel like everything they do and everything they care about outside of the classroom is valid and has a place in the application.
That was so good. I feel like there were so many gems in that, Liam. Yeah, I was definitely shaking my head emphatically. I think, yeah, I just want to echo that. I mean, everything Liam said is true. I think he provided a real great assessment of how the majority of our offices are viewing extracurricular activities. I would also say that we're looking for quality experiences from those, right? Versus students that are just trying to check off boxes and share a quantity amount of things that they're involved in. We're looking for, to use Liam's words, engagement. Like, how are you engaged in these spaces? And the reason it's important to us in college admissions, I think a lot of the times we talk about the what, but not the why. Is because, to Sarah's point, right, like at Colgate, that school spirit's a really big deal. So if you're engaged as a Berkeley scholar, then their assumption is, we make massive assumptions in admissions, we get paid to do it. The assumption is that Sarah would be an engaged, scholar at Colgate, right? So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to see in what areas is the student passionate, engaged, and how will that transfer to our own college campus. But we are understanding of too that perhaps a student hasn't found their spark yet. Perhaps a student hasn't found their niche yet. So students can also use the additional information space if extracurricular activities were limited for some reason, or they weren't as robust. So you can use that space to kind of talk about what you would like to do outside of that. And then it's something that I've been seeing over the past 2 years is I love when Liam discussed that we are widening our scope. It doesn't have to be something formal. So something I've been noticing a trend in admissions for extracurricular activities or / engagements is that students are able to kind of just say, I took it upon myself to learn the ukulele by watching YouTube videos, or I really fell in love with baking. And so now I bake on the weekends with my grandmother, or those things matter to us because they're nuances of your identity. And we're all looking for students that are multiplicitous in their identity. So I hope that piece is helpful.
Thank you. Sarah, this question is maybe a little bit more specific to you, and I know you have to leave us pretty soon because Sarah's got a job. But do you want to tell us a little bit about your choice to take a gap year, what you've been doing, and why that was impactful for you, or why it's been impactful for you?
Yeah, sure. So I chose to take a gap year mainly due to COVID. I was talking to my parents about it, and going to a private university, even if it had tons of space and not that many students during a pandemic, just it wasn't going to work for me. And if I could take the year, it would be way better. And they said, okay, sure. And I spent the summer looking for jobs. I found one at Haagen-Dazs, and I've done customer service work before. Haagen-Dazs and I did not fit. I was terrified and I cried, I'm not gonna lie. So I went looking for a new job, and I found one at Berkeley Carroll, and I absolutely love it. I'm a math teaching assistant. That's where I will be going. I have a class at 9:30. And beyond that, I have been equestrianing really hard. My parents, again, they leased me a horse for the summer, and I've been able to really dedicate myself to my sport and take the time that I didn't always have in high school to make the most of it. Because I think one thing that I was nervous about going into college was like, horseback riding it's an expensive sport. Like, I don't know what that's going to be like for me as an adult. And that was kind of one of my fears. And another one of my fears was, what does it mean to manage a job and, yourself? I had a few jobs in high school, but I was scared of the real world. I've filed my taxes now. I have a driver's license. I set up a savings account. Like, a gap year for me has been learning what it means to do life with help. So maybe diet life. But I think those experiences have made my worries about life after being at home calm down. And I think what that does is it allows me to be concerned with college. Because I feel like we spend, as students at least, like, you spend so much time worrying about so many things, you forget where you are and you don't make the most of where you are. And so as I go into college, I'm recharged because I've had a year of following my own personal intellectual interests through my journal article reading and all that stuff. And I've also developed a better relationship with my parents between COVID and just being at home. And so now when I go to college, I'm going to be ready to really, stick to what I like, not have to worry about all these things that were just freaking me out. And it's a great time to take a breather and just, figure it out. And I personally think everybody should take a gap year if they can. So I'm a little biased, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to college now, and I'm really happy that I took the year off.
Thank you, Sarah. One thing, just to sort of change gears again, one thing that I think our office, we try to do is to really think a lot about what schools we're recommending to students, and how, and we do so, I think, thinking about what's going to be appropriate for our students, what's going to work best for them. I think Lewis, Carolyn, and I have such, so many years of experience in this field and thinking about how admissions works, that we spend a lot of time with each student and to craft that list. But I'm curious as to maybe if everybody could speak a little bit to the experience about what your process is like figuring out which schools were appropriate for you, and how you sort of shaped your college lists, or your students, how they're shaping their college lists. Nobody?
Is that for parents or the students?
Yeah, both can answer. because I think, while I think the students ultimately will spend, I know Felicia's son, her youngest, Max, is working with Mr. Almonte, and they've spent some time together before he went off to the island school, getting to know one another, thinking about which kinds of schools would be really great for him. But a part of that process is a little bit of students' own initiative. We provide an initial list, but we want them to do some research and grow and think about what makes sense for them. So if maybe we can talk a little bit about how you all came to that list, how parents help their students shape that list, that would be great.
You're right. Just before Maxwell left, we did have a meeting with Luis, and he shared a list of schools that he thought would be great for Max. And what Maxwell has done during his time away is created his own list. He took the college book, or somehow has a college book with him in the Bahamas. And he's created his own list and his own rating system, and he has shared that via Google Docs. So, when he comes back, we'll come up with a plan of attack as to how we try to visit them. Some of it will be virtual, and those that we can go to in person, we will. Being the youngest of 3 kids, he had a little experience doing some college tours with his older siblings, but this is a whole new world that we're in right now, as far as like looking at schools and what works and what doesn't. And I think some of the message that, we've been giving to him, and I guess any students you kind of lament with during this time, is they aren't getting the opportunities to go to these campuses to get a real live feel of what it feels like, right? It's all kind of virtual. So we just kind of give the message like, look, let's take a shot and see what it looks like. And if you get there and it doesn't feel right, it's okay to pick someplace else. It should be it should be a genuine match that you want to have and are excited about, and not one you feel like you just kind of picked, out of a fishbowl. So we'll start doing college planning, stuff like that, when he gets back.
I think the way that I kind of started making a college list was by thinking about, there was the one that Ms. Williams gave to me, but I kind of figuring out what either type of learner you are, or what is the best way for you to learn was super important. I think one of my favorite parts about Berkeley Carroll was the small class sizes and the very personal relationships I could have with teachers. And I think as I was looking at colleges, I realized how important it was for me to go somewhere where I would be able to have those relationships with professors and not be in a class of 200 people. That's totally the right move for some people. I personally felt like it wasn't the right move for me. And so that kind of narrowed my search down to smaller liberal arts colleges that are undergraduate focused. And so that's kind of right off the bat an easy-ish way to narrow down your list a little bit. And I think that is something that I'm very happy to have figured out about myself and chosen in a college. I have a couple friends who are at bigger schools, and some of them really like it and some of them don't. I have a couple other friends that are at small schools with maybe that wasn't a big enough step away from a small high school. And so I think that is just one facet of college that you should take into consideration. But I think that making a list of your the values you find in a college, maybe for Sarah, it was somewhere with a lot of school spirit, and that's a totally legit and important thing to be thinking about, because if you haven't done that kind of processing and know those things about yourself, then you could, like Felicia was just talking about, end up somewhere where you're like, oh wait, this thing was actually really important to me and I don't have it, and now I know that. And so, which is also a valid way of approaching the college process as well. But yes, that is kind of how I went about it.
For me, I used a few of my outside of our extracurricular and activities and interests to decide where I wanted to go. So I was very clear with my parents. I was like, I need to go to a place where I can ride horses. And that actually cut out a few schools for me. I was also very particular that I wanted to go to a smaller school because the relationship I had with my Berkeley Carroll teachers, all of them, they were all some of the greatest people I've ever met. I was like, that was perfect for me. It really helped me as a student. I need to go to a place where I can develop that again. And I felt like at a bigger school, because my brother went to a bigger school, that kind of relationship, it's a little harder to build. And I was like, I want it to be easier for me to do that because it matters to me. And and geography, I was very specific that I wanted to be a 5-hour drive at the least from my house, because I wanted it to be close enough that if something really bad happened, my parents could come get me, but not close enough that they could come see me on weekends. That was the radius. And between those three, I was actually able to get a pretty solid list of schools. And then the campus tours, I will totally say, really helped figure out, like, I went to Vassar and I was like, I just don't think I can see myself here. It's a great school. It's just not for me. And that kind of experience was really good. And talking to students who went to Berkeley Carroll that went there is another really good method of figuring out what a school is really like. And there was one other thing I wanted to say. I can't remember. Between those things, that's how I figured my stuff out. And this was it. Talking to Miss Williams, because there is that whole like, will you ED or will you not ED or whatever. That kind of conversation when it came to my list, which I know is really far down the road, it was really great to have the college office because, like I said with the essays, like they have an understanding with these schools that you might not always have. And like sort of figuring out which of your values matter more to you, they're really great to just sort of bounce ideas off of.
I just wanted to echo a couple of things that were just said. In particular, the importance of speaking to people at the school that you think you're most interested in. Not speaking to people who are like 5 steps removed from the school, but people who actually go there or who went there recently. And that was something that my son did later in the process. But I think it was one of the most enlightening things for him was to speak to current students once he sort of like had honed down into the schools he was really interested in, and speaking to people who were at those schools but were doing different things. So just backing up a little bit, what my son was interested in was finding a liberal arts college that had a strong visual arts department. And so that sort of narrowed his list. He was also looking at some bigger schools that had strong visual arts, but that more on the smaller side. And then once he sort of honed his list, he started talking to current students about their experience. And they weren't only students who were in the art program, but students who were doing different things there. So he got this sort of perspective on the school that I think was really inspiring and super helpful. And I think that those sort of textured conversations can really help and take all this out of this sort of really abstract thing. Like, I think I want to go to this school because I've heard these random things, or I read about it in this book, or, it's very, reputable, or whatever these things are. But really, actually, like, what is the experience like of being there? How did you find yourself there? What do you like doing there? How are the classes? And so forth. So I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle for him.
I would like to say the same thing. The visits definitely help in the conversations with students there currently and more recently, but it also helps with what Sarah spoke to about early decision. Both of my kids did early decision, and it was so liberating to know in December where they were going to go so they could truly enjoy the rest of their senior year, right? So, and you can't make a decision like that this is the school I want them and they want me. Like, you have to go through all those different processes in order to be able to do that. But December to May was a completely different experience for them than some of their classmates who waited until April to make that decision. And I can remember and they were very conscious. A lot of the early decision kids were very conscious of not, starting a party, because they knew a lot of their classmates were still very much in the process and it was very stressful. So that if your child can get to that point early on, that they know where they want to be, and that is their love match for school, do early decision and be done with it.
And, of course, every student sort of has their own journey. So some students, early decision, when it works really well. And then there are other times when, students are sort of required to go through that entire year process. But that's, Lewis, Carolyn, and I sit down with each student, as has already been mentioned, and we work really closely with not just the student, but with the family to help make the best choice, because an early decision choice also depends on many things, not just do I love this place, but also, is this a school that's going to provide me with everything I need, both academically, financially, in some cases, and socially. So it's a big question that we really do as college counselors, spend a lot of time with each student, making sure that they're making the right choice. I have one last question, and then we're going to open it up to everybody else. So please get your questions ready. But if you can maybe in like 1 or 2 sentences, tell us how you sort of changed from the beginning of this process to where you are now. And Felicia, I know you're going through it right now with Lewis, so you may have a different feeling about it because you're right back in the thick of it. I know this is the last one though, which is exciting. But if you could just maybe give us a little sense of how you're thinking about the college application process changed from the beginning to where you landed.
Again, the first kid is always the test, right? So, and then the third kid is just like, look, just don't burn the house down. Like, let's just make sure everything you're alive. You get to the college process. But we just looked at our kids very individually. Like, they're just 3 very individual kids, and what each of them needed, we did. And Maxwell is proving absolutely true. Like, his approach to the whole process is very different from what Michael and Madison's was. I see there's a question in the chat about, what activities, what sports and things you should consider when it comes so that a college application looks good. I'm not 100%, well, I can speak from personal experience. We have 3 kids. The first kid was a sport freak and did it and loved it. And it really spoke to his college experience and search process. Like, he saw colleges he probably would not have seen had he not been the soccer player that he was, right? So that spoke to his process and what that was. My second kid also played sports, but had no interest whatsoever in doing anything sports related in college, none. She was looking for something much more cerebral and things like that in that experience, and she found that at Pomona. My youngest kid used to play all the sports. Like, at 10 was like, I don't want to play soccer because I want to play lacrosse. I want to do that. And I'm going to play lacrosse so I can go to Duke and play lacrosse. And it was, like, the running joke was like, that's really cool. But, probably 4 years ago, we were like, friend, you actually have to play lacrosse in order to go to Duke and play lacrosse, right? So, you have to like be realistic about some of these conversations you have with your kids. So we're taking Maxwell's lead. Like I said, we took Michael's lead and helped him a little bit more because there was a little bit more. It was not completely hands off, but it was definitely let us know what you need, because that's who Madison had been throughout the entire Berkeley Carroll process. Like, she was the kid who could manage it. We were there to support. We were privy to everything that was going on, but we didn't take it over. And Maxwell has his own approach, and we're doing that. So I think, the more you do it, you feel like a seasoned pro, but I think each kid is different. So each experience for us has been different.
I think one of the things that I've learned from this process is there are, and maybe it's not just from our own college process with Noah, but sort of seeing my brothers go through this process with their kids and a lot of my friends, is this sort of, recognition that there's a vast array of incredible schools out there. And they're filled with really engaged students and incredibly committed professors. And there's like this very vibrant life going on across the country in many, 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 many schools. So I think sometimes at the beginning of this process, there's a feeling like, that there's not going to be how is this going to work out? How is this going to evolve? And the answer is it will evolve. It will change. It will grow. It will end up in a positive place because there are a lot of different places that your child can go, and it's just a process of working with the college office and taking their guidance and figuring out what's the right fit for your student and where they're going to thrive. And there are many, 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 many places, extraordinary places. So I feel like, recognizing that can sort of take some of the worry out of it, that there are an enormous array of wonderful institutions that your kids could go to.
And they're going to get in college. They're going to go to college. Like, they're not going to be like rejected by it. That's not going to happen. You should know that, and you should make sure they know that. I think that's important. Like, there is a college for everybody, and where you think you want to be may not be where you end up, but ultimately it's where you are supposed to be. Like, I love this statement. College is not a prize to be won. It's a match to be made. It's true. I wholeheartedly believe in that. Like, we all have a vision of what we think in our heads, what it's supposed to be and what it's supposed to look like. And, for a lot of us, we've discovered that's not what it is. So I think it's important to understand, you as parents, if your kid wants to go to college, your kid will be in college. Like, I think that's it.
Did we get everybody? Okay, well, we want to make sure that we have time to answer questions from our audience. So please feel free to raise your hand virtually, and they use a little hand raise button, or drop your questions in the chat. There was a question that we sort of started to answer about, what should a ninth grader be doing over the summer to help shape a future college application? And I'm actually going to ask maybe Mr. Almonte, sorry to put you on the spot. I'm going to spotlight you because I think maybe it'd be nice to have another voice besides mine in this space.
Sounds good.
So do you want to talk a little bit about what a ninth grader might want to do to shape their future applications?
Yeah, of course. In terms of what the colleges look like, and I used to work at 2 selective institutions, and now we call it on the other side of the desk. But really what the colleges are going to be assessing is ninth grade and on. And with really kind of understanding that Berkeley Carroll does provide opportunities for your students to take advantage of, whether that's through co-curriculars, affinity groups, BC Talks, athletics, but really understanding that where they are in their processes, I'm kind of trying to figure out in ninth grade, what it is that they like. That I would say is something that is really important to hone in on. And I think that we've mentioned that a couple of times throughout this panel, is really understanding what's out there. Because I think, when Leanne mentioned these sustained activities, and Eugenie mentioned these activities where you're in them for a while, but also trying some really new things. It's that exploration piece and really kind of encouraging them to do things, I think, is the biggest thing that I would say. A lot of students in my admissions career, when I was reading applications, the thick of what they were doing started in 11th and 12th grade, when they could have been starting or had a more sustained activity starting in ninth grade. So really kind of pushing them to try different things in the school, knowing what the school offers and having conversations with them at home about what activities are there, what you think that they might like, or having conversations about what they might want to try next. But also understanding what happens outside of school is really important too. If there's any summer camps that they're a part of, if they're interested in getting some type of part-time job, if they're doing anything at home that's really kind of igniting their passion and a hobby, and really kind of nurturing that, I think is the greatest step that you can do right now. With 9th and 10th graders, I would say that they, at least in my experience, I think that they do things just because, Berkeley Carroll requires it. But really allowing them to understand why that's important. And, every time that I have a conversation with a student, I always say well, you should stick with this if you like it, or if not, try to find something else that's really new, because it's really important because you're going to learn so much about yourself, but it's also going to be worth it in the long run. When you sit down for a job interview, when you apply to college, or when you're just talking to other people and just trying to connect. But I would say the biggest thing is that you want to analyze what is it that they actually want to try, and really kind of encouraging them to do that. And if they want to drop something, definitely encourage them to pick something else up, because all too many times I've spoken to a Berkeley Carroll student sometimes and they're like, oh, I stopped doing philosophy club. And I say, oh, well, what else did you try instead of that? And they're like, oh, I don't know yet. And I'm like, well, you should definitely go to this one and see what that one's about. Or next week, go to the movie club and see if that's a place that you can really see yourself being a part of. But I think that that's the biggest thing, is keeping activities in conversation, presenting them with different ideas that they can pick from, not necessarily telling them what to do.
One thing I would just add, I think we forget the value of helping out at home. You know, we, especially being in the world we are in now, where students are at home a lot. Sometimes at-home chores have taken on a new meaning for our students, and to keep that in mind is something that they're filling their time with. It's not just about the activities. It's not just about, you know, I've joined this club or that club, but what they're doing to support their families, even in small ways or big ways, is important too. This is a question for Liam and Christina. Neil is curious to know if colleges are still counting visits as an indication of seriousness or consideration in a student's application once the pandemic ends, or is this a thing in the past? So this is a question about demonstrated interest.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think to think about it as a thing of the past is an invitation right now to think about it, and how are we tracking it now? Right. So demonstrated interest, especially for highly selective institutions, is a priority. And so what I can share is, obviously we made space in our selection committees that families could not be with us in person, and they were obviously very limited opportunities to visit in person. But the fact that we were hosting 20 to 25 virtual events a week throughout the fall, and we would read students that had not gone to any, right? That sent a message to us. Another piece to consider then is sort of that process is what's being offered and how can my student participate at a level that's manageable for them, that this is still a symbiotic relationship, right? Like, so I'm not just going to things so it can look like I'm interested, but I'm going to things that will help me figure out more information about this institution so that my list feels more salient. So that's kind of the I think lens to use. But in full transparency, we are tracking that. We are noting that at Lafayette. So I'll speak for Lafayette, 100%. And when it came down to very hard decisions to be making, demonstrated interest was one of the ways in which we could weigh an admittance or a deny or a wait list, 100%. In addition to that, and I share this with students, and I always tell them, none of this information that I share with you is to alarm you or to provoke anxiety. I want you to be an alert, informed participant of your process. And so for us at Lafayette, we use a CRM system in which we could even track when students are opening up our emails, how long they're on the email, what links that they're clicking on. And we also will go into the file when we're making very hard decisions. Oh, they haven't opened up an email in 3 months. They didn't click on this. They didn't register for this. They didn't respond to this. So, and again, I know that's like, oh, technology, like you can even track these things. What I tell students to manage that, you should be caring about making sure that you're demonstrating your interest and your institutional understanding. So if you cannot prove interest through physical visits, through attending all of the events that they offer, your application has an opportunity for you to demonstrate institutional understanding. You get the mantras of the school, you get the school spirit. That's another way to provide that layer of understanding of your demonstrated interest. And again, just know that for your top 3 schools, that's what I always tell students, your top 3 schools is the ones you need to manage demonstrated your interest with. And then that's much more manageable for a student and their schedule. And then knowing I would say you should know your territory manager. Who's the actual person that's going to read my application? Who's the voice of my application when I'm not in the room? That's also sort of a nuance of demonstrated interest. So I hope that's helpful to say, like, this is not going away. If anything, it's just going to change shape. And it's our job, though, as territory managers, to help you be shape shifters as we shape the new normal for college admissions.
Yeah, from the NYU perspective, I would second a lot of that, with the notable exception that NYU doesn't really look at demonstrated interest in our process. So we track all the same stuff. We probably use the same CRM where we can see whether you've opened your emails, and if we've reached out for a document that's missing like 3 times and you haven't opened it or gotten back to us, that may be cause for concern. But in general, NYU is not looking specifically at demonstrated interest to make decisions. But to Christina's point, I think it's, yeah, really essential to kind of manage that process for yourself, to be staying on top of the communications you get. If you have the opportunity, as you do now, to visit colleges that are so far afield virtually, I think it's a really exciting time to take advantage of that. So don't stress yourself out about it, at least not on NYU's front. But I think knowing what the pandemic has kind of created, students have so many more options to be able to really engage with colleges beyond just going and visiting in person, right? So I think just encouraging your students to take advantage of that, and, you know, reach out to people if they have questions, not just for like a fake, hey, I'm here email, but if they really have questions and want to engage more deeply, that's what we're here for, right? We're here as resources. So absolutely, just encourage them to reach out, but only if there is some substance to what they actually want to learn about.
And just to add a note, you know, with thinking about demonstrated interest, the reality is there's certain schools, I would say the smaller populations or liberal arts colleges, where they get a lot of really competitive applicants. And sometimes they want to guarantee a class or guarantee a student that if they're going to go out with an offer, that the student's pretty serious about them. So I imagine that demonstrated interest isn't going anywhere anytime soon. It's a really kind of personal touch to the application process. And on the flip side, with college counseling, you know, we always counsel our students, and we let them know, like, hey, this is the type of school that's going to be looking for this. Send this person an email, and organically introduce yourselves, because it's not really, you know, it's hard for you to know which schools do or do not do that. So we offer a bit of guidance, but then we also encourage the student to just ask, you know, does this school track demonstrated interest? Because a lot of times it's not a huge secret, and the admissions officer is going to just tell you, like, yeah, we are looking for some point of contact, but it has to be organic. That's what we would say. But we do counsel our students. I've worked with our students to say, hey, these are the schools that you're looking at. These are the ones that I know for sure track demonstrated interest, and you want to make sure that you stay on top of those schools, but also check in with the other ones, because you just never know. So it's better to dot your I's and cross your T's, instead of going through an application process, missing a really important part and a really personal part of the application.
I'll
I
just,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something which is sort of related to demonstrated interest, but sort of not, which is that doing interviews virtually can be tough. And I think, not interviews, sorry, doing tours virtually can be tough. And I think one of the things that we found was that to help it feel more alive and contextualized was to do some of these things that the schools are offering, to go on their website, to see how they talk about themselves, to participate in one of their events, to do something so that then when you did the tour, you sort of knew more about the place. Otherwise, it can feel sort of abstract and not very, it can feel like the other tour you went to. But if you've learned something about the school, either by, you know, visiting their website or doing one of these events, you get more of a feel for what they care about, what the priorities of the school are, the texture of the school. And then when you go to the tour, you have that knowledge, and that informs what you're hearing. So I would highly recommend that. And it's not just about, you know, showing them that you're interested. It's about informing yourself and giving, you know, giving the student the knowledge that they need.
And just to add on to that, thank you, is that for some schools, we talked a lot about the personal statement, the Common App essay, but some schools will actually have supplemental essays that will ask you specifically, why us, right? And you want your students to be able to answer that question really thoughtfully. And the best way to do that is to be knowledgeable about the institution. There's a question about prepping for the SAT or the PSAT. Just so one thing to know, as when students at Berkeley Carroll enter into the 10th grade, second semester, we work with Compass Prep to give them practice SAT and ACT exams so they can figure out which test makes the most sense for them to be preparing for. So we really recommend that students start preparing for those exams, usually in the fall of their junior year. Some students will start the summer before. We offer a series of on-campus opportunities for students to start getting ready for those exams. So they don't need to be thinking about that as a 9th grader. We really want them to just be 9th graders and still like learn things about themselves. They're getting the curricular information they'll need to be successful in those exams. They don't necessarily have all of the information they need in order to do well in the practice in the prepping portion for the SAT or the ACT until 11th grade, after they've had a little more math under their belt, after they've read some more complicated texts. And then the other part of that question was, are the tests going to be relevant? That is an ever-changing answer. Right now, many colleges are still test optional because access to testing centers are limited sometimes. Some schools are on 3-year pilot programs. So places like Tufts University, they've committed to being test optional for another 3 years after, I think, this current year. And many schools are doing something similar. So that question probably won't, by the time you ask that question when your student is a junior, we'll have a different answer for you. But there are some schools that are probably not going to give up their attachment to those exams. And so we've been recommending that our students prepare for them if they need them. And if they take them and they're not what they want, knowing that test optional is an option. And test optional really means test optional. We counsel each student individually about that. And so in thinking about what's most important in an application, the transcript is the first thing that you're going to be leading with in the application process. Colleges need to know that you are academically prepared for the work that they're going to be, that you would be doing if you were admitted to their school. And then they look at the essay and then recommendations. SAT, ACT could fit in the middle somewhere, depending on whether or not a student has submitted them or if a school has required them. And then interview is something that feels a little bit more supplementary because they tend to not be required of schools, but they're recommended, which means they can be evaluatory or they may not be. Sometimes an interview is just another information session. It really depends on the school. So I think, you'll hear as we keep going and talking about this process, you'll hear that, you'll hear the word holistic a lot. And I think Liam and Christina will use that word to describe how they review students at their individual institutions, but they look at everything and not one thing. Some things are probably a little bit more important than the others, but I think if a student has an essay that doesn't quite connect, that doesn't necessarily mean they're out of the running for being admitted to a school. Right? Or if an interview is not, if they're not having a bad day on their interview, that doesn't necessarily knock them out of the running. So there are a lot of things that come into play when colleges make decisions about who they admit and why.
Just to plug in, I'd also say with the opportunities for an interview and the essays and some of the supplements, or sometimes even an email to an admissions officer where you're just communicating with the person that's probably going to read your application. A lot of times these are an opportunity for context. If there are 3 C's on the transcript in 9th grade, everyone's going to see that. That's not a secret, but maybe the secret or the underlying thing behind those C's is something that's happened in somebody's life, or a transition, or moving schools. So that's really where that part of the application process can humanize different things, which really kind of changes the dynamics of how the person, such as Liam or Christina reading the application, might review the actual application. So So, I think that that's a really great part of our process, is really getting to know your student and having them open up, to realize like, hey, this is where you should say this, or I think you should send this type of email. Just kind of explaining some context, because a lot of times if that goes unnoticed, it can really change the conversation that could have been happening if things were disclosed. And some things should be disclosed, and others, I would say, aren't necessary for the application process, but that's a conversation that your student will have with their counselor.
Thank you. We have time, I think, for one more question that just came through in the chat. I really appreciate that the BC Match to be Made philosophy. I was curious if that means you encourage students to reach for a dream school, or tend to encourage them to have a first choice that is more within what BC thinks is in their quote unquote range. I've heard that some high schools try to urge students to have a first choice that is more likely to be a place where they get in, and that tends to discourage students from reaching. I think that's a really great question. One of the reasons why I like being at a place like Berkeley Carroll, and I like the culture that we've created around college admission, is that it's very unique to each student. We know that colleges are looking for a wide range of things when they're thinking about who they're going to admit. And so we would never discourage a student from reaching for something that they wanted, but we also want to make sure that they understand the full context of what applying to a reach school might look like. And a reach school for one student might be a middle school, to use our language, a middle school for another student, and a foundation school for one student could be a reach school or a middle school for another student. So we spend a lot of time, when we talk about crafting a list for a student, we actually do spend quite a bit of time figuring out what that looks like. And we use a lot of internal data. We use national data that colleges provide in terms of their admit rates and what their average test scores are, if those are important, or their average GPA is, if that can be helpful in helping to make those determinations. I would like to think that our students all feel really supported, regardless of whether or not they're applying to a reach school or a foundation school. The ultimate goal is that they're happy with all of the schools that they are applying to. So if the reach school you applied to doesn't work out, then you are just as excited about a school in your middle or a school in your foundation list. As Felicia said, everybody is going, if you want to go to college, we make sure that happens for you. But we wanna make sure that students do it in a way that's really healthy. And like Sarah said, getting hung up on one place probably isn't the healthiest thing to do. And given that college admissions is constantly changing, schools that students might have walked right through the doors fairly easily 5 years ago are different institutions now. They have more applicants and the same number of spots. So we do consider all of those things when we help students shape their college lists and make their choices. I think we use the word appropriate a lot, but we want to make sure that students are making the appropriate choices for themselves so that they have success at the end of the process. One of the things that I think we're really conscious of, this year, I think we saw students, we didn't see this a lot, but I heard from other colleagues that they had students applying to 20, 25 schools, which to me seems a little bit like absolute madness. And the reason why that seems like madness is because just because you throw a bunch of things at the wall, you hope one sticks, that means a lot of things are going to fall to the floor. That's a lot of disappointment. And what we want our students is to not, disappointment is inevitable sometimes in this process, but we don't want that to be the overwhelming feeling when they get to the end of the process. We want them to have choices, and we want them to have choices that they're really happy with. So we never discourage students from applying to a school that's considered a reach school, but we do help them think about balance and what makes the most sense for them, given their academic profile, given their interests, where they see themselves, and what is gonna make for a successful application process.
Yeah, and to echo Kalia's comments, really kind of stressing that balance and a balanced list is really important. And looking at a student's list and saying, I've had conversations where I say, hey, like, you can actually reach a little bit more, or you need to have a stronger foundation. And to use kind of like a literal analogy, if you've ever had something really up high on a cabinet and you needed a little bit of help, you want to stand on something secure, you want to have a secure foundation to be able to reach a little higher. So if a student is, in love with a reach school, or their dream school is their reach school, admissions is never guaranteed, and it's a very big gray area sometimes. Depending what the institution is looking for that year, a lot of times can drive their metrics basically. So my biggest piece of advice is to balance the list, but also to have a really strong foundation where a student is happy going if that ends up being the way that it turns out, because some students fall in love with their reach schools, their middle schools, or their foundations, and any way that you can think of, sometimes they end up at either one or the other. It's not anything that we can predict guaranteed, but we can offer pretty strong guidance, I would say.
Does anyone else want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just love to share, just for the parents kind of understanding what this looks like in the college admission side of what your college team is doing. So like when and I just want to stress, because I think it's so important, I recruit at the top tier independent schools in New York and DC, and the difference between them is vast. But what stands out to me every year after every cycle is the health of the Berkeley Carroll scholars in this process. And that's because your college team is doing this from a strength-based approach and quite personalized, right? It's almost like they're tailored counselors for each student, and that's so real. So I can't tell you how many times like I'll get an email from Caroline or Clea, or I'll hop on a call with Felice of like a question about a particular student, and off the cuff, like I call them mid of their day, they can speak to me in real time with real details about their scholars. And it always blows my mind because I know we're one of the colleges that these scholars are applying to, but they know them and they know the list, and they can share with me, if I have questions, or they'll follow up and say, how's my student doing? Like, what's going on? And the fact that they can provide that tailored experience to me as a counselor for so many counselors that they have to do this for, it just speaks to the health and the personalization of their process. And trust me, that's not the case at some of these top tier schools. So just know that there's like this health that exists in this process that as a parent, you should just feel so sort of cloaked in safety and warmth, because not a lot of offices approach it this way.
I just want to echo that and encourage everybody to trust the process that BC College Counseling Office has created, and just sort of read the emails, participate, ask questions, listen. I remember anticipating that first meeting with Clea with the college list with all this angst, and then we had the meeting, and it was like, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to work. We're so excited. This is going to be fine, because we have pros who are helping us along, and we just need to kind of do what they say. And we'll be fine if we pace ourselves and don't get too ahead of ourselves and too worried about how this is all going to go. Just trust the process.
Any other final thoughts? Because I think we probably should let people go. We've been holding you captive for a long time, even though it's been a very good panel. No?
You should save the stuff in the chat. There's some good discussion in there, and just stuff that could be helpful. Questions that weren't asked during this talking part, but there's good information there that people might want to keep.
We'll definitely save the chat and pass it along. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. Again, you have been fantastic. And I hope that the information that we shared with our 9th and 10th grade families really helps you have a better sense of the process. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help in any way. For the sophomore parents, you are a little bit closer to this process. We are going to be hosting drop-in times for the sophomore students to come and ask questions of the college office. We just did a few programs with them, and so we want them to start to get to know us so that we can also start to get to know them. So we'll be meeting with them very soon. But if you have additional questions, we're here to help. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.